On the far side of the sky, where the night's breath thins and stars settle like small coins in a pocket, there stands a palace whose eaves drip silver, as if the very roof were shedding rain made of light. It has the hush of a well-kept shop at closing time, the quiet of swept thresholds, the low comfort of things put in their places. Within those pale halls moves Chang'e, keeper of moonlight, whose hands know the measure of a wick and the correct patience for a stitch. She moves as if the moonlight were cloth she must fold with care. Slow hands, exacting breath, and the palace answers her motion with a soft, obedient glow. Her day and night are the same day, a small circuit of rituals that keep the world down below from waking in the wrong light. The first thing she does, as if waking a sleeping hearth, is turn the little sand glass that records lunar hours. It is not a great instrument, but a small glass of pale sand, a device soothed by use, its frame worn where fingers have rested over centuries of turning. The sand within runs gold and slow. When she upends it, the grains whisper and begin their patient descent. The sand glass names time at the palace, a measure of tending, an invitation to begin. Following that, she checks the lanterns. The lanterns are not the kind that hang by the thousand across a street. They are modest panes of paper and thin bone, folded like small boats and set in frames of oak and mica. Each pane holds a particular temper of light, some to pour clear, cool rays like a cup of water poured in a bowl, others to scatter, to lend warmth and a color that reminds children of summer evenings. Chang'e inspects the wicks. She trims them with a knife that has been sharpened and rested until it sits like an old promise in her palm. Where wick meets oil, she is a surgeon and a gardener both, coaxing the flame to a face it recognizes. The kettle on the low brazier sighs. A small cauldron of nectar simmers, not for hunger, but for scent, for the way steam carries memory, the way letters carry a name. She pours a measure into tiny cups, and breathes the sweet steam as if to test the weather. This is stewardship, and she has chosen it. She is not lonely so much as singular, a life made of purpose and small comforts. That choice is itself part of the palace's light. She keeps the moon's temper steady. She makes sure the beams that are sent down to sleeping towns are even, that the seam of the dome above the earth is stitched so that no sudden shadow should fall across a child's face. If you enjoy slow retellings of old legends, the ones stitched by small hands and steady breath, a quiet like helps others find this story. A stitch more, a pain more, a memory more. Around Chang'e, the palace hums with its own small community of hands. The jade rabbit labors over a mortar the size of a table. It is a tradition as old as someone's breath to call him Jade, though his fur gleams like moonstone rather than the ornamental mineral. In one steady rhythm, he pounds herbs and milks them into pastes that are folded into the lantern adhesives or brewed with the nectar for those rare nights when a strengthening is required. He fashions tiny implements from silver scrap and star metal, a pair of tweezers with a curve like a crescent, tacks made to fit the thin ribs of a panel, a needle whose eye has been burnished so that thread will draw through paper without catching. His broad hands are precise, even his pauses are measured. There is also the seamstress spirit, a diminished voice woman with fingers that know the language of stitch and beeswax. She keeps spools of thread wrapped in cloud silk and threads that smell faintly of osmanthus. Here, the smell is a suggestion, a memory that drifts from the kettles below and somehow marries itself to the needlework. Her seat is by the window where moonlight is thickest. She will wax a thread with beeswax, rubbing the length until it gleams, then draw it through a parchment pane, and the sound is a little like a harp string being tuned. The seamstress is small and quick, and her hands move so fast that apprentices sometimes think she has more hands than bodies. A bookbinder lives near the stairwell, a man who keeps oak slats and glue, and who knows how paper eats light. He knows the right measure of paste, how much to let it sit, when to press a new pane between two boards to seat it without stress. He carries a mallet the size of a child's fist, the head wrapped in cloth, with which he gently sets grommets, small rings that will keep the panes from splitting under starlight. There are apprentices, too, children who fold and test lantern panes, learning the geometry of light with small, earnest fingers. They fold as if learning prayers, each crease a syllable. The palace is not full of ceremony for ceremony's sake. Ritual here is craft translated into reverence. Mending is prayer, and making is conversation. Meals are shared quietly around a low table. Small rounds of something like bread that tastes faintly of honey and the salted tang of moon water. Cups of the nectar that Chang'e keeps warm in a blue-glazed kettle. There are stories at the edges of tasks, fragments of older tellings that get stitched into the present with jokes and corrections. The younger hands are encouraged to question, to try a fold twice, to remake a careless stitch. Memory is taught with a hand on the shoulder and a demonstration, never with a scold that tells less than the act itself. Only once in a while, in the pauses between tasks, does Chang'e allow her remembered past to come close enough to touch. People below, on earth, speak of Ho Yi, archer, savior, husband, or simply a name that rings like a bell in different stories. Some say he shot down sons and was given the elixir, which she drank to prevent it from falling into hands that might misuse it. Others say she took it by accident, or that he sent it to her for a moment of selfish desire. The tellings are many and cautious, and the palace honors them as something like folded paper, true in shape, variable in crease. Chang'e keeps such memories as a stitch holds a seam, necessary though the technique may be hers alone. For some nights she will hum a fragment of a song that remembers the earth. For others she sings nothing at all. These differing versions of the past are spoken of here as variants, as a way to show how stories keep people company rather than weigh them down. The palace is a place where ambiguity is permitted. There is an unspoken rule that legends are to be handled as one handles fragile paper. Treat them with care. Do not press them into a flat truth where a crease is possible. It is in the course of one ordinary moon turn, while she mends a small pair of lantern panes, their frames oak-veined, and their paper slightly honeyed from the sun before it left the glass, that the fissure makes itself known. It begins as a shadow so thin it might be an errant breath, a hairline that crosses one pane in a place so small it seems almost comical to call anyone to attention. Chang'e notices it first as one notices the wrong note in a melody. There is no complaint in it, merely an anomaly. She leans, candlelight and moonlight mixing across her forearms, and traces the line. It is not in the pane alone. Above, in the dome that cups the palace, a seam has developed, a tiny gap where two silver plates of the sky meet and do not quite kiss. Light slips through with a different appetite. Where once the rays fell like combed silk, they now come with the texture of sifted ash. For a moment, Chang'e watches in stillness. She has tended small things all her life. She has been spare-handed and thorough. A fissure so slight might be dismissed, and if it were the only thing she did that night, she might tuck it away into the ledger of a quiet life. But the mind that keeps light is trained to track consequences. A seam left loose southward could widen when the moon changes. A pane with an irregular feed might begin to vibrate, to split. A child's path might be left in shadow. Practically, a stitch undone is a door opened to risk. She calls no trumpet. Instead, she sets the lantern she holds upon the bench, wraps her fingers about the sand glass, and turns it once, twice. The third turn is this time a measured intake, a small rite that marks the transition from tending to problem-solving. The apprentices glance up, sensing the shift. The seamstress pauses to set aside a spool. The bookbinder rests his mallet within reach. The jade rabbit stops pounding and looks up with his hands curled warm around the pestle. There is no panic, only the quiet acknowledgement of work to be done. Outside the arching windows of the palace, the earth sleeps on unaware. Small towns breathe under the repaired blue of fields and hedgerows. Fishermen's lamps blink like careful stars. If the seam worsens, a light that calmed sailors on a river might tremble. A knight's lovers might stumble into a wrong path. Chang'e understands, as do the hands around her, that their labor is not only a duty to the palace, but a quiet generosity to a world that has never seen a single one of their faces. Gathering helpers is not a bell or summons in the traditional sense. There is an ease and economy to it. Someone will put down their work and come. Someone will finish the cup of nectar and shuffle toward the bench. Often the community is already present, for these small repairs make rounds of conversation and laughter that ripple like good broth. Today, the circle forms swiftly, each bringing a particular set of tools and a particular patience. Jade Rabbit seats himself on a low stool, his mortar quiet beside him, save for the soft scrape where his pestle sets the last of an herbal paste into a bowl. From his workbench he takes an armful of little silver tacks and tiny rings of star-bright metal. He taps them on the table to sort them by size, his broad fingers deft as he places each into small compartments lined with felt. There is a sound to his sorting that belongs to ritual. Tiny clicks like raindrops on a roof. He also brings a small jar of resin cooked with sweet osmanthus, indefinido. The precise recipe is a matter of tradition and variant, which will serve as a sealant to help the panes weather the cold. The seamstress offers beeswax and fine thread. She shows the apprentices how she rolls the wax between thumb and forefinger before drawing the length through, explaining softly that waxing the thread helps it find its way through paper without tearing, much as one oils a hinge before closing a heavy door. The apprentices nod like small machines learning human rhythm. They are careful to keep their motions slow and precise. The bookbinder carries an oak slat, long and thin, planed, smooth. He lays it beside the broken pane and pats it, as if testing for readiness. He unwraps a mallet whose cloth has been rubbed thin from use and sets it on the workbench. He hands Chang'e a small block of putty in a bowl. The putty looks like softened dove's down, pale and ready. He explains in a voice low and perfectly practical that putty must be warmed between the palms to be workable, and that it should be applied with the flat of the thumb, not the tip, to avoid leaving sharp impressions. His instructions are small and exact, and they travel across the bench like a current. Apprentices bring with them folded panes of paper, each creased into a geometry that will decide the light's character. Paper is chosen by weight and translucence, temperate, for a lamp that must last without burning brittle, thin where color is required. They lay them out on the table as if displaying leaves gathered for dye, some pale as new milk, others with threads of mica that will catch unwary glances. One apprentice unfolds a sheet that has been painted with a faint wash, a pattern of small waves that will fracture light attractively. Chang'e smiles, for an easy fix is also a lesson in beauty. There are also smaller, more unusual hands present. A wood spirit comes, small and knotted, to pass on knowledge of grain. He smells of resin and damp, and his fingers are little as a child's but competent and sure. He knows where a slat might bend and where it must remain true. A pair of child apprentices shuffle at the margins, entrusted with fetching measures and holding oilcloths. They speak in whispers and giggles, the kind that fill the palace with the sound of gulls at a harbor. Each person brings not only tools, but a memory, an anecdote about a similar crack, a joke about a pane that refused to sit, an old ritual for blessing a new seam. Chang'e listens and coordinates. There is a tenderness to how she assigns tasks. She has studied each hand's strengths. She knows which apprentice has a steady thumb and which can fold a pane without the paper buckling. She does not command so much as orchestrate. Her voice is calm, exacting, but without hurry. You, with the small mallet, set the ring carefully, she says. Bring the wax in a thin ribbon. We shall seat the oak first, and then check the tension on the panes. The phrasing is a litany of craft. It says more about the life of the palace than any sermon. As the group settles, there is another ritual. They share the first of the warm rounds and pour the nectar again. Sharing is not merely social, it is practical. One's hands cannot be steady without a warm mouth in one's stomach. They sip and eat in silence for a few heartbeats. Then the work begins. Beeswax on thread. The seamstress draws a length measuring double the seam, winds it on her forefinger, rubs a small bead of wax along it, and the thread grows sleek. She demonstrates how to pinch the thread between finger and thumb, to flatten its profile so the needle rides through without tugging. She slides a needle the size of a wagtail's feather through the waxed thread and makes a pilot stitch through a sample pane, the whole making a small, respectful sound as if a name has been laid down. The bookbinder fits the oak strip under the lip where the pane will sit. He places it with a reverence reserved for supports that must carry both material and story. The slat is trimmed to length with a plane that sings, and he sands the edge until it is silky. The seamstress draws a line with a silver stylus, a hair's width, and the apprentices mark the points where grommets will sit. There is a choreography to the act. Jade Rabbit heats a gilded punch, the metal kissing flame and cooling with a hiss as he dips it into oil. He tests the grommet in a drop of cold water to ensure it does not stress. He passes it to the bookbinder, who places it carefully. The mallet makes a soft thump, not the violent banging a fool might prefer, but a measured setting. The ring pushed into place, then clamped so the paper will not tear where it meets star metal. All the while, as hands and instruments make the repair, stories spill. They are not heavy narratives, but small fixtures of oral repair. The seamstress reminds a child of a night when a pane refused to take a fold, and how patience won in the end. Jade Rabbit tells a quiet joke about a past apprentice who once sealed his poultice into a lantern by accident, and nearly lit himself to fame. These are the salt of a community, necessary for flavor, but not the main course. Interlaced with these anecdotes come the fragments of a different kind. memory threads of Chang'e's own life. Sometimes she speaks of the taste of nectar at the edge of dawn, or of a night when moonlight shone so white upon a valley that a whole village woke believing a miracle. Once she hums a melody that she says her mother hummed. There is gentle disagreement among the others whether the mother in question belonged to this life or an earlier telling. And the children listen as if being taught the sound of a tide. There are also moments of silence where only the sound of making holds the room together. The mallet's heartbeat, the whip of thread, the brushing of sand from an oak slat, the faint clink of a jar lid closed upon more glue. These are the sounds of a liturgy about small things. Up to this point, the fisher has behaved like a patient animal, visible, acknowledged, contained. But as the night advances and the repairs begin in earnest, the seam shows new temper. It breathes like a mouth testing a new tongue. When a piece of paper that should lie flat takes a small sag, everyone notices. When the light that filters through the repaired panes shifts color, a band of colder blue rippling through an otherwise steady silver, a child stares and asks aloud and without theater, "Is the moon sad?" Such questions are not frivolous. They are literal. The mood of the sky changes how shadows fall on a cottage, how sleep settles on a household. Chang'e bends over the central workbench, palms skimming the putty she is about to roll into shape. She remembers the precise instructions given to her when she first learned this art. Warm the putty, press with the palm, scrape with the fingernail to remove excess, then smooth with a rag so the seam will read as one. The memory is a craft mnemonic, and it keeps the mind clear. She sets a small puddle of putty on the oak, spreads it like the first thin covering of pastry, and seats the new pane. The panel responds with a faint cup of sound, as if a small bird had folded its wing into a nest. A sudden gust crosses the palace, not a physical wind so much as a tremor in the dome, a tightening that makes lamplights flicker. Chang'e's hand halts. The apprentices look toward the arch of the sky. Above, the seam, where two plates met, opens a fraction more, and a thin ribbon of shadow threads through. It is no larger than a hair, yet to them a hair can be the difference between a stable stitch and a line that runs. "Hold," Chang'e says, and the word holds the room. She takes stock. The oak is in place, the grommets are set, the panes are ready. But the seam's temperament has altered. Perhaps the seam's opening is no accident of old metal and cold. Perhaps it is a symptom of the moon's moods, of forgotten weights set upon it by the long arc of time. Here the story splits into what folk voice says and what craft responds to. The artisans have to make a choice about how to finish. Will they apply an additional support under the seam, an armature that changes the way light will fall, or will they attempt a sympathetic repair that preserves the seam's original curve? That question draws them closer to the nature of the palace itself. Repair is not always about returning to an earlier state. Sometimes it is deciding what kind of future you will accept. They can mend for fidelity or for beauty. They can hide the scar or accent it. The thought is not abstract, it is practical. A plate secured with iron will change thermal expansion, cause checks in the paper. A less intrusive fix may last only a season. Chang'e considers the children at the table, the way they have learned to see light as a material. She thinks of towns below who will read the repaired moon like a sign. And she thinks, privately, almost like a benediction whispered to a kettle, of those stories that tell of a woman on the moon who watches the earth and remembers. In some versions, she is there because of love. in others by accident, and in still more by choice. Those variations have a bearing on how she will choose to mend. If she is a guardian whose exile is grace, perhaps the repair will be humble, meant to preserve. If she is a keeper who has chosen solitude to keep something precious, perhaps the repair will be proud, adorned. "Let us mark the seam as it is," she says finally, in a voice that asks rather than commands. "We will not hide what we have endured, but we will make it belong." The seamstress nods, extracting a length of thread waxed and glistening. Jade Rabbit dips a thin blade in his resin and gestures toward a string of small lantern panes that have been folded for precisely such a purpose. Paper frames painted with faint washes. Deep indigo, soft rose, a faint gold that catches the eye but does not shout. These panes will be strung like a small street of light along the seam, not to conceal, but to celebrate. There is a hush as they prepare the procession of panes. The apprentices line them up, each pane cradled like a kitten, and pass them toward the seam. The bookbinder takes a measure, precisely balancing the way each will hang. Chang'e lights a cup of nectar wax and passes a wick through a pane to test how its body of light will behave when married to the moon's temper. It is a test of character. Will the pane stiffen the light, or will it sing with it? As the work moves into place, a small group of voices lifts, a gentle counterpoint of blessing and story. One apprentice remembers an old sky trader who used to stitch his sails with silver thread, and who believed that a well-mended seam invites good weather. Another whispers a variant of the tale of Ho Yi, where the man came to the moon only once and left a shadow in his place. There is laughter, too, a lightness that keeps their hands from trembling when the mallet falls. They set the first pane into the seam, seating it upon the oak. The grommet is checked again. The mallet gives its soft, precise thump. The putty is applied, smoothed into place. For a breath, the moon seems to hold its own, and then, in the midst of this careful choreography, a small, unexpected sound occurs. Beyond the palace's threshold, a sound from earth. A bell, perhaps, or the low noise of someone singing in a village below. It is humid with life, a reminder of the world they touch but do not enter. The note travels up, a tiny arrow of human sound, and, for a single instant, the moon answers with an altered beam. The newly set pane scatters light into a pattern that looks suspiciously like a ladder of tiny doors, each door opening to the sleeping faces below. Chang'e feels something shift inside her chest, a warmth that is not unlike gratitude. Yet, even as her hand waits to set the next pane, the seam gives a slight, plaintive creak. The apprentices glance to one another. The bookbinder's brow tightens. Change is underway, deliberate and urgent. They have completed the first stage of the repair. The oak rests. The first pane takes its place. Waxed thread lies coiled. But the final fastening, the ceremonial joining that will either calm the seam or announce its change to the world, remains. It is a moment heavy with possibility. They might anchor the seam in a way that the moon will bear for 100 seasons, or they might leave it as is, a newly ornamented line meant more to remind than to force. Chang'e looks at each of her companions, the seamstress whose hands smell of wax, Jade Rabbit with his array of tools, the bookbinder who has been steady as a keel, the apprentices with their folded panes like postcards of light. She sees that they are ready to choose. For a long while she does not speak. She breathes in the sweet scent of the kettle, feeling the steam across her face as if it were an old friend leaning in to hear. She turns the sand glass until the grains are midway, a small habit that anchors the moment. "We will take care," she says at last. "We will not pretend the past is undone. We will add what is needed and leave the moon itself to keep the story. Let us stitch so that the light grows generous." Hands move again, this time with a deliberation that is part ceremony and part compass. The seamstress threads the needle and begins to pilot stitches that will hold the panes. Jade Rabbit sets rings and tacks. The mallets strikes now part of a slow hymn. The bookbinder kneads the putty like dough and presses it between slat and pane, smoothing it so the seam will read as a line that belongs. Children fold smaller lanterns to place along the inside of the dome, little ornaments that will catch stray light and keep it kind. The seam hums, and the palace returns to its even breathing. But the fisher's temperament is not entirely banished. It lies, like a thought at the edge of sleep, ready to return if not fully reconciled. Chang'e feels it as a thrum against the ribs of the world. A small friction, a reminder that all mending is also a concession. She knows they have done much. She also knows that some decisions will ripple into nights not yet lived. They have come this far, and the final ceremonial fastening waits. The moment where strap meets ring, where the last stitch binds the panes into place and the seam will be given its definitive face before the world. The apprentices stand ready. The lantern of test burns steady. Outside, the earth continues to breathe, unaware of the deliberations of hands in a palace of silver. Chang'e lifts the needle between finger and thumb. For a heartbeat, she looks at the sky that limbs the dome. A slow, patient sphere whose weight is not so much gravitational as moral in her mind. She thinks of the stories that brought her here, of the choice to tend rather than to leave, of the kitchen table wisdom that has taught her how small acts become offerings. She lets her breath settle like a held breath finally released. She begins the stitch. The thread passes through paper with a sound like cloth in prayer. The work proceeds, but to finish it, to plait the final knot that will either steady or transform the seam, is to choose a future for the moon's face. Her hand pauses on the last loop, the knot waiting like a question. Around her, the palace is silent in its attention. The apprentices hold their things as if in respect. At that instant, from the far edge of the dome, a thin, pale light, not from the lamps but from somewhere within the moon itself, pools and spills through the slight gap, catching on the edge of the oak slat. It beads like water on a leaf. The light seems to hesitate. Then, as if testing the new geometry, it flows differently. Color bends, a faint sweep of rose, a pale green, and for a moment everyone sees in it a reflection of the earth below. Roofs, smoke, a child's blanket. Chang'e's hand feels the cool of the thread and the warmth of the putty. She meets the eyes of her companions. All of them understand what is asked of them. Whether to knot, whether to secure, whether to let the seam remain a new kind of brightness. This is where the palace waits and chooses, where small hands decide great things. The air holds. The sand in the glass slides toward its base. The apprentices breathe with the cadence of the room. The bookbinder adjusts a ring. Jade Rabbit's fingers twitch in readiness. And in the hush, an echo arrives. A single low sound from earth, carried up as if to remind them that their work is for someone who will never know their names. It is a sound that softens the choice without deciding it. A bell, or a dog barking, or a lullaby from a distant house. It is all at once ordinary and sacred. Chang'e keeps her fingers poised on the final knot. the seam awaits the last small revelation. Her fingers tremble only a little as the loop forms. The thread slides under itself and the paper gives way with the soft, deliberate reluctance of good things being altered. The knot waits, small and formidable, like the hinge of a door that may open to a room you have not yet named. Chang'e feels the room's attention as a tangible thing, an expectant hum that curls around her wrists, around the mallet, the putty, the folded panes. She draws the loop tight, but not closed, leaving the thread with a slackness that is deliberate, a tether rather than a chain. In that slackness the seam can breathe. When she finishes, she does not celebrate with exuberance. There are no trumpets in the palace. The sound that rises is a clustered household sound, a child's soft exhalation, the jade pestle resting in its bowl, the seamstress making a small, pleased noise like someone smoothing a skirt. The lamps answer in a chorus, their light steadier, but not identical to the light from before. The newly strung panes throw the moon's glow like a choir of small voices, each adding its tone to a larger harmony. Where once there had been the single, even voice of silver, now bands of tender color march along the seam, a rose that leans toward memory, an indigo that keeps a secret, a thin thread of golden warmth that seems to laugh quietly at cold. Chang'e leans back, palms on the bench, and lets the warmth of the kettle breathe across her face. There is in her a complex economy of feeling. Relief, yes, and a soft pride for work done well. There is also a recognition that the moon she tends will now bear a new design. It will carry its scar differently. The apprentices stare at the seam as though it were a newly bound book that had yet to reveal its story. One of the younger ones runs a fingertip along a pane without touching, marveling at how the color changes with the angle. The seamstress slips a small ribbon of beeswax across the final ring, smoothing the join as if sealing a forbidden letter. Outside the palace, the sleeping towns will not know the precise motions that made this repair. They will notice only the result. Perhaps, in a fisherman's cottage, a woman will wake and think her child has dreamed of a ladder of tiny doors across the moon. Perhaps a cartman's lamp will show its strings of light like a promise. The world reads sky in shorthand. It will translate the new seam into superstition or solace according to the needs present under the eaves. Chang'e accepts this indirection. Her labor is private and public by turns. The stitches are made with small hands, yet their result is a gift that crosses the distance between heaven and hearth. When the final grommet is set, and the last smudge of putty smoothed away, the bookbinder sets down his mallet and breathes the way a man relieved of a long journey might do. He pats the oak slat as if to reassure it that it is needed and will be kept. Jade Rabbit returns his tools to their box with a practiced ease, humming under his breath in a rhythm that has kept time through many small repairs. He pockets a scrap of star metal that had been left over. He will make a tiny charm of it for a child who always asks too many questions. The seamstress tucks a length of waxed thread behind her ear, as if keeping an old habit ready for the next mending. Chang'e moves among them slowly, making small rejoinders. She asks the apprentices how the fold tests went. She remarks on the bookbinder's neatness. She compliments the rabbit's resin for its depth of scent. Her voice is small, the temperature of a near neighbor's door left slightly ajar. She does not lecture. She notes, praises, instructs in increments, letting the work's pedagogy be the instruction rather than a didactic pronouncement. In this way, the palace functions as a home. One attends to what needs doing, one passes on technique without grandiosity. As hands are put finally to rest, one of the children, no more than 9, palms still soft from folding paper, asks a question plainly. Will the moon remember how it was before, or will it always be like this now? The question is practical as well as philosophical. It sits like a small pebble and invites ripples. Chang'e kneels to be at the child's level, her movement so slight it could be mistaken for a bend in the light. The moon remembers everything, she says. Her voice is low and steady. It remembers the pattern of its tides and the faces it has shone upon. But memory is not the same as keeping a single, unchanged shape. Sometimes we carry what we were in the way we wear an old shawl, folded, patched. Sometimes we let a new stitch show. Both are remembering. She touches the child's cheek lightly with the back of her hand, a gesture less possessive than familiar. We have not taken away an old thing. We have shown that even the places that appear whole can be carried differently. This answer satisfies more than the child. It satisfies the room. The apprentices nod as if a piece of their practical lesson has been given a moral hue. They have learned in one act that mending is a choice about future shape rather than a forced return to an origin. This is a lesson that reaches beyond craft. It is a politics of the small, decisions whose ripples are large because they travel through ordinary lives. There is, in the wake of the repair, an interval of celebration that is domestic and not ostentatious. The low table is cleared, and a new round of warm bread passed around. The kettle's simmer, once urgent, is now a steady murmur. Chang'e pours for each person, letting the steam mark their faces like a benediction. They eat and talk in fragments, plans for the next maintenance, a joke about an apprentice who had once folded a pane into a boat, an old tale of a sailor who navigated a storm by the moon's favor. As the conversation unfolds, it is clear that the palace's life is stitched together by these recurrent acts. Food to steady hands, stories to teach attention, tools to make meaning practical. When the table is cleared, and the apprentices are sent to wash their fingers, Chang'e walks to the great window that looks toward earth. She leans on the sill and watches the way the moon casts its light now, struck through panes that scatter color into bands. The towns below are still sleeping, but in a harbor she sees a lone lantern inhale and exhale. In a valley, a thin smoke thread rises and then falls back to sleep. The moon seems to have developed a new manner. It has become less an unblemished mirror and more a lantern with charmed filters. Its beauty now includes a visible history. She has the sensation of someone who has altered a garment not to hide a stain, but to make the repair part of the design. It is an aesthetic decision as much as a practical one. The people who will read this moon will see a seam that is both honest and intentional, a line of panes that could be read as ladder, garland, or stitch. The palace has made the choice to tell its own story upon the sky. Later, when the apprentices are asleep in their small alcoves and the servants have tipped logs onto the dying brazier, Chang'e lights a single cup of nectar and cradles it like a memory. Her hands are still. She allows herself the indulgence of remembering the variants of the tale that brought her here. There are those who say she drank the elixir to save the world from a greedy hand. Others insist it was an accident, that she rose unwillingly and stayed out of necessity. There are versions that speak of love, others of exile, and some that are softer, acknowledging both. Here, in the palace, they keep these versions as one keeps folded letters. They read them, they store them, they let them soften in time. Chang'e does not insist upon any single telling. She allows the multiplicity to be companionable. A thought occurs to her, small and practical. A future seam needs a registry. In the way that a craftsman might mark a tool with his initials, she decides they should document the repair. Not as a ledger of dates and costs, but as a small book of memory. The bookbinder sits up at this suggestion, bright-eyed. He will prepare a volume with a cover of thin oak leather, pages stitched with the leftover waxed thread. Each apprentice will write a line, a note about the night, and the book will live on the bench as a testament to the way they had chosen to mend. It will be a small codex of care. The bookbinder begins at once in the morning light, cutting boards and curling glue, while the seamstress teaches an apprentice how to balance a stitch so it will not bite through. The jade rabbit fashions a tiny tool for the child's charm with the leftover star metal. The apprentices learn, not in lectures but by doing, how to measure the weight of a putty bead, how to test the transparency of paper with a candle, how to sand an oak slat until it forgets its roughness. The palace functions as an apprenticeship in both craft and patience. Days pass with a cadence like the sandglass's measure. Turn, tend, test, rest. Chang'e keeps to her circuits, checking slights, listening for any tremor in the dome, tasting the kettle's nectar as if it were a weather gauge. The seam holds, the panes sing with a stable voice. Below, the towns begin to tell their own small stories about the moon's new pattern. A potter in a riverside hamlet begins to make bowls with a band of indigo. A weaver trims a shawl with tiny ladder stitches. These are not deliberate homages so much as the ways people copy beauty at their hands' ease. A child in a village will, in the telling that goes from house to house, narrate how the moon seemed to lower a string for her to climb in the dream of a particularly feverish night. Another will say, a saint must have been up there mending, for the night lit their way to a lost goat. The palace is far from these small dramas, but the light it sends binds into countless small responses. Chang'e receives these stories as one receives letters from people you do not know, with gratitude, and with the knowledge that meaning is made by those who read the sky. She files them mentally like small chips. When a traveling merchant whispers that in one town the seam has been called a bride's veil, and in another a veteran's medal, she smiles. Both readings are true enough. The repair has become a place for the world to hang its own small metaphors. One evening, some weeks after the mending, a rare thing happens. The moon wears full and generous, and there is a clarity to the air that feels like the clean linen of a morning. Chang'e notices, from her window, a pattern cast upon a valley, a careful lattice of light that looks from afar like a map of doors. People gather in certain houses, drawn by a sudden light that shows small details they had not seen before. A patch on a roof, the cat asleep in a doorway, the white in an old woman's hair like a last bloom. From the palace, this effect is an affirmation. Mending not only kept the light but offered new readings. The moon has sent something that looks for attention. That night, Chang'e goes down to the bench. She sits with the apprentices as they trace with their fingers the edge of a new pane. The apprentices, now more confident, ask sharper questions, not only about how to set a grommet, but why one might choose color over neutrality, why to make the seam visible rather than invisible. Their questions are not naive. They are the reason craft survives. Chang'e answers with examples. A seam that tells a story keeps people from forgetting. A hidden repair might keep them comfortable but teaches them nothing. She teaches that sometimes you decorate your scars so they become invitations rather than warnings. One of the apprentices, who had been quiet through much of the repair, looks up and asks, "Do you ever wish to go back?" The question contains a tenderness that edges on accusation and curiosity, and Chang'e understands what it asks. Would she return to the earth, to the table where voices are closer? She weighs the answer as one might weigh tea leaves between fingers. She thinks of the nights she has spent listening to the tides, of the small children who learn to fold light into lanterns, of the way a repaired seam comes to be read as a shared language. She thinks also of the versions of her life that sit like papers folded into her memory, of love lost, of mistaken drinkings, of choices and accidents. She knows now that her life is a pattern of tending. To go back would be to leave a work half done. To remain is to accept a particular kind of solitude that is rich with purpose. I do not know, she admits, and there is no shame in that admission. There are nights when my body remembers warmth in a different way. There are days when I long for the small confusion of having too many people at table. But then there are nights such as these, when a child's question makes the seam look like something we can teach. I stay because tending matters to someone who will never thank us, and because I have chosen the keeping as one chooses a necessary labor. Her honesty feels like a stitch in itself, simple, utilitarian, but binding. The apprentices accept it. They return to their pains secure in the knowledge that their teacher does not pretend the life is simpler than it is. Time continues. Seasons blur in the palace to a rhythm of work and rest. Chang'e continues to turn the sand glass, 3 times in a ritual that anchors the day's shift. And sometimes she pauses longer than the glass requires, letting its sand run almost to the bottom and then up again, as if to test the elasticity of measuring. The palace keeps teaching. A new apprentice learns the patience of waxing thread. A different one learns how to thin putty until it reads as seam, not as patch. The bookbinder adds the apprentice's small script to the memory book, and it takes on the heft of a community's archive. Not everything is tidy. There are nights when the moon's dome shows tiny tensions elsewhere, small checks in the metal plates, a pain that fogs as if remembering a rain, and each requires judgment. Chang'e's work is as much about choosing which thing to fix as it is about the fixing itself. She learns to attend to the world as you attend a relative. You know which complaint to take seriously, and which requires only a warm meal and a change of mind. Her choices are guided by a practical ethic. Keep what keeps living, reveal what teaches, and never mend so tightly that nothing may flex. Flexibility becomes a moral principle. As years fold like paper into book, a new generation of apprentices grows to skilled hands. They carry their lessons into the world in small ways. A basket maker in a coastal town who learned to bend reeds like a pane. A midwife who stitches linen with the steadiness of a bookbinder's mallet. A schoolteacher who tells children the story of the moon's seam, as if it were a lesson about care. Though these intimations travel mostly unmarked, Chang'e takes some quiet comfort in them. The palace is not the only place where small things become meaningful. Sometimes a child's folded pane becomes a soldier's compass. Sometimes a seam stitch becomes a family's pattern on a quilt. There are, too, visitors who come seldom and with a humility that touches the keepers. A pilgrim once arrived from a far coastal market. His boat had been blown from course and he had slept under the moon's new pattern. He came not to question how it had been mended, but to offer thanks, plucking a small, plain flute from his satchel and playing a tune in gratitude. The melody was simple, but the palace heard it as it hears all music, as a way the earth answers light. The children gathered at the bench and learned the tune, and it hummed in the margins of their work thereafter. On an evening when autumn's chill edges the palace with a thinness that clarifies sound, Chang'e stands by the window and watches a procession of lanterns on earth. People holding lit paper frames across village streets and riverbanks. The lanterns echo, in miniature, the work they had strung along the seam. There is a kinship between the two. What one circle does privately, the other copies publicly. Chang'e feels, in this moment, a small contentment that is not triumphal, but deep like bedrock. In the quiet that follows, she performs a small ritual that has become private and necessary. She turns the sand glass thrice. The first turn she does for gratitude. Thanks for hands that did not fail her, for minds that kept patience, for a moon that allowed them to add beauty rather than forced repair. The second turn she does for the apprentices, to remind them that the work they learn is both practical and ethical. The third she performs for the earth below, the populations who will never know their names, but who will sleep under the light they tended. Each turn is accompanied by a thought, a short internal phrase that states an intention. Be steady, be kind, keep light where needed. These phrases are not recited aloud. They are the shape of a prayer as modest as a stitch. Before she extinguishes the lanterns for the night, Chang'e writes in the memory book. Her handwriting is small and precise, a line that describes the night's work, the apprentices present, and a fragment of a lesson. She signs it with a mark that is not her name, but a small symbol of a lantern. The bookbinder binds the page and sets it back on the bench where anyone may read it in time. The child's charm made of leftover star metal sits on the bench beside it, a small testament to the way something spare can be turned into a promise. As the palace settles into its long sleep and the apprentice's breathing becomes even, Chang'e sits alone for a while at the window. She looks at the repaired seam once more, then at earth, at the lights that blink and the dark that holds them like a blanket. She allows herself an imaginal journey, as she sometimes does, to think of the many versions of her story again. She imagines the telling that pronounces her a heroine and the one that calls her an exile. Both narratives exist, and both are allowed in the palace. She does not correct either. She stores them as materials the way her companions store threads. There is a quiet satisfaction, not busy nor anxious, in knowing the work will continue. One cannot mend everything forever, but one can teach hands that will mend after one is gone. Chang'e rests in that knowledge. Before the story closes, she performs a small act of invitation. It is not a summons to the palace. No one from Earth may easily cross the space, but a quiet outreach, a gesture of attention. She lights a single small lantern and sets it at the window. It burns steady and even, a bead of light that will be part of the moon's new song. She bends over the sand glass one last time and turns it gently until the first few grains begin their descent. Then she turns it twice more, each turn a small ritual of ending the day. If you would like to carry this quiet into your own night, breathe with me now, slowly and simply. Sit or lie in a comfortable place. Let your shoulders unbolt as if unpegging a coat. Inhale through the nose, slowly to the count of 4, imagining moonlight filling the chest like a pale cup. Hold the breath for a moment, as if pausing to notice the surface of a calm pool. Exhale for a count of 5, letting the air leave as if releasing a thread after it has looped a stitch. Repeat once more. Inhale 4, hold, exhale 5. On the second exhale, imagine the moon's seam, lined now with small panes, sending down a soft, forgiving light that warms the top of your head and tumbles like a slow, gentle tide down your shoulders. Keep this image a while. If you like, let it carry you into a sleep that has the peace of careful hands. When you open your eyes, perhaps look up the next full moon and notice its character. Perhaps you will see a ladder of tiny doors, a band of color, or simply a steady silver. Whatever you see, remember that small acts of tending travel far. If this calm journey pleased you, subscribe for more nights like this, and share the story with someone who likes to look up.